Imagine a bank so big, so influential, that its collapse sends shockwaves through the entire global economy. Now imagine that bank wasn't brought down by some complex, movie-like fraud scheme, but by something far more mundane, yet just as destructive: sheer incompetence. This is the story of Silicon Valley Bank, a tale of how a series of bafflingly bad decisions by its leaders led to one of the biggest financial disasters in recent memory. Welcome to Deception Reports, the channel where we dissect the biggest corporate scandals and failures to uncover the truth. Today, we're diving deep into the spectacular implosion of Silicon Valley Bank. This wasn't a story of crooks in the night, but of executives in broad daylight who simply failed to do their jobs. How did a bank at the heart of the tech world, flush with cash, manage to go under in just 48 hours? Let's unravel this shocking tale of mismanagement and hubris. To understand SVB's collapse, we have to start with the quiet problem that was brewing for years. During the tech boom of 2020 and 2021, money poured into Silicon Valley. Startups were getting funded left and right, and they all parked their cash at SVB. The bank was swimming in deposits, going from $60 billion to nearly $200 billion. Now, what do you do with all that money? A smart bank would manage it carefully, keeping it liquid and safe. SVB did something else. They took a huge chunk of this money, tens of billions of dollars, and locked it into long-term US government bonds. On the surface, this sounds safe, right? Government bonds are the gold standard. But here's the critical mistake. These were long-term bonds, with maturity dates 10 years or more into the future, and they bought them when interest rates were at historic lows, near zero. This was a massive, concentrated bet that interest rates would stay low for a very, very long time. Anyone with a basic understanding of economics could see that was a risky gamble. It was like betting your entire fortune that it will never rain again while standing in a rainforest. The problem with long-term bonds is something called interest rate risk. When new interest rates go up, the value of old, lower-rate bonds goes down. If you need to sell those old bonds before they mature, you have to sell them at a loss. As the Federal Reserve began aggressively hiking rates in 2022 to combat inflation, the value of SVB's massive bond portfolio started to plummet. A ticking time bomb was now planted right in the middle of their balance sheet. And incredibly, the people in charge seemed completely oblivious to the danger. This brings us to the next catastrophic failure: the complete absence of risk management. For a bank of its size, this is simply unforgivable, believe it or not. For most of 2022, the very year interest rates were soaring, Silicon Valley Bank had no chief risk officer. The position was empty for 8 critical months. It's like sailing a supertanker into a hurricane without a captain on the bridge. The person whose entire job is to spot icebergs ahead was nowhere to be found, even without a CRO. Basic risk management practices should have been in place. The most obvious move would have been to hedge their bets. Hedging is like buying insurance. You spend a little money to protect yourself from a big potential loss. SVB could have easily used financial instruments to protect against rising interest rates. It would have cost them a fraction of their profits, but it would have saved the entire bank. They chose not to. Why? The only logical explanation is a toxic mix of arrogance and the desire to maximize short-term profits. They thought they knew better. They were convinced rates would stay low, and they didn't want to spend the money on an insurance policy for a disaster they believed would never happen. This wasn't a calculated risk. It was a reckless disregard for fundamental banking principles. By early 2023, the time bomb was about to explode. The bank's massive bond portfolio was now underwater by billions of dollars. As long as they didn't have to sell the bonds, it was just a paper loss. But the tech industry was slowing down. Startups were burning through their cash faster and withdrawing more money than they were depositing. SVB was facing a cash crunch. They needed money to cover these withdrawals, and that meant they had to start selling those devalued bonds. On March 8th, 2023, SVB's leadership made their final, fatal error. They publicly announced that they had sold a portion of their bond portfolio for a staggering $1.8 billion loss. To cover this hole and raise capital, they also announced they were trying to sell over $2 billion worth of new stock. This announcement was a public confession that the bank was in serious trouble. They essentially held up a giant sign that said, "We've messed up, and we need cash, fast." The reaction was immediate and brutal. This wasn't just a quiet whisper in the financial world. It was a fire alarm. Prominent venture capitalists, whose portfolio companies made up the bulk of SVB's clientele, saw the writing on the wall. They advised their startups to pull their money out, and to do it now. What followed was the digital equivalent of a 1930s bank run, but instead of people lining up around the block, it was a tsunami of online transfer requests. In a single day, customers tried to withdraw an astonishing $42 billion. The panic spread like wildfire on social media and in private chat groups. The bank that had thrived on the interconnectedness of the tech world was now being destroyed by it. There was simply no way for SVB to meet that level of demand. The game was over. By the morning of Friday, March 10th, less than 48 hours after their disastrous announcement, Silicon Valley Bank had completely collapsed. The digital bank run had drained them of all available cash. They were insolvent. Federal regulators from the FDIC had no choice but to step in, seize the bank, and shut it down. It was the second largest bank failure in US history, and it happened in the blink of an eye. The doors were locked. The website was taken over by the government, and the once mighty financial pillar of Silicon Valley was reduced to a ward of the state. The speed of the collapse was breathtaking, a testament to the power of modern communication and the fragility of trust in the digital age. Let's be perfectly clear. This was not bad luck. This was not an unpredictable black swan event. This was a textbook case of corporate incompetence at the highest levels. The CEO, Greg Becker, had personally lobbied Congress just years earlier to weaken risk management regulations for banks of SVB's size. He got what he wanted, and then proceeded to run his bank directly into the ground. He and other executives were also selling millions of dollars of their own stock in the weeks leading up to the collapse, while publicly assuring everyone that the bank was fine. While not legally considered insider trading, Tedaminis, to put it mildly, deeply questionable, the board of directors, the ultimate overseers, completely failed in their duty to hold management accountable. They signed off on a strategy that was fundamentally flawed, and then failed to notice or act as the danger grew more and more obvious. The fallout from SVB's collapse was immediate and severe. It triggered a crisis of confidence across the entire regional banking sector, causing stocks of other banks to plummet and lead into the failure of other institutions like Signature Bank. Thousands of tech startups suddenly found themselves cut off from their funds, unable to make payroll or pay their bills. The threat of a wider economic contagion was so great that the US government took the extraordinary step of guaranteeing all deposits at SVB, even those above the standard $250,000 FDIC limit. While this prevented an immediate economic catastrophe, it was effectively a bailout, a move that sparked intense debate about corporate accountability and moral hazard. The executives who ran the bank into the ground walked away with the millions they had earned over the years, while taxpayers were left to backstop their failure. So what's the ultimate lesson from the spectacular failure of Silicon Valley Bank? It's a stark reminder that arrogance is the enemy of competence. SVB's leaders thought they were the smartest people in the room. They basked in the glow of the tech boom, believing they were immune to the old, boring rules of banking. They ignored basic risk management, made a massive, unhedged bet, and when it went wrong, they panicked and made the situation infinitely worse. This wasn't a sophisticated deception. It was a simple, colossal failure to perform the most basic duties of running a bank. It's a story that proves that sometimes the most destructive force in the business world isn't greed or criminality, but sheer, unadulterated incompetence. The story of SVB is a crucial case study in modern finance, and we'll be covering more stories like this. If you want to understand the real stories behind the headlines, make sure you subscribe to Deception Reports. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.